Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. So today I actually wanted to share my favorite dungeon build as well as my favorite raids build for Crusader. So first of all, I just need to give huge credit to Oroth, who actually did a lot of testing on Crusader DPS builds and trying to get the highest DPS combination. His video was actually the starting point for this build, and it gave me a huge inspiration. And I urge you guys to check out his channel. He did a detailed breakthrough of kind of how to squeeze the most damage out of Crusader. And actually, I was really surprised because to me, Crusader always felt like kind of a support role in PvE, and in PvP, it's a very strong class. You've got CC, you've got very tanky and also decent damage, but in PvE, it always felt like Crusader shouldn't be able to do crazy damage. But after watching Oroth's build, my mind was completely changed, and I just saw that he's doing so much damage, and I just thought I had to create kind of a dungeon build and raids build around the essence choice that he had, as well as the legendary gems choice. So without further ado, let's get started. So I think a good point to start this video would be with the raids build, and then after I show you guys the raids build, I'll explain how you can transition and play the dungeon build, which is also very similar to the raid setup. So first of all, here we have the Iron Ignition as the helmet essence. And this is a very crucial piece to have in this build. So what this does is basically give you a fire banner which will move with you. And this will give a buff to the primary attack of all nearby allies, as well as your summons and yourself. So this just boosts the damage of everything incredibly high. And this actually does the most damage in the build, as you'll see. But why this is so crazy is that most people these days, they have pretty high crit chance, especially with the new gem, the Roiling Consequence. So going for the normal banner isn't quite as good as the Iron Ignition Burn banner. And also because of the offhand choice, which I'll explain, having continual damage like a burning effect or a poison effect or something like that just makes your Condemn do crazy damage with the offhand, which I'll talk about. But this is the helmet choice that I would suggest you go for. The next choice is the chest, which is Akarat's Rebuke. So it's very simple. Akarat's Rebuke basically acts like a buff for your primary attack. So it says Condemn fills your soul with valor for 5 seconds, causing every primary attack to unleash a lightning bolt at your target. So if you're spamming your primary attack, this will also buff the damage of your primary attack by using Condemn. And it's really very useful to have this skill if you have high attack speed. So the next choice is the Faith Ascendant Shoulders, and also the Forgotten Savior main hand, which probably not many of you know about, and even I didn't really know about it myself, but I decided on using this package here. The Faith Ascendant Shoulders, basically what it does is it increases all damage done by 19% after using Falling Sword, and the Forgotten Savior, which also buffs Falling Sword, what it does is that it slashes and burns enemies in front of you. Forgotten Savior was actually the most buffed essence from all the Crusader essence in the last patch. So how they buffed it is that they decreased the cooldown from 9 seconds to 6 seconds, and they also increased the attack speed to 100% extra attack speed, and they increased the slashing damage by 12% and the burning damage by 20%. So now, what you've got here when you use Falling Sword is you've got this insanely fast attack, which has a very low cooldown, and you'll be able to see that I'm having the 19% extra damage for almost 4 seconds, which is really, really strong. I basically have 5 seconds cooldown, and I have probably, I would say, 80% uptime of this 19% buff, which will buff everything in my setup. So next we have the Panther Essence, which is the Light Striders, and what this does is it changes your Drawn Quarter horse into 2 horses, which charge at your enemies and knock them back. And this does a decent amount of damage, but the main thing is that it's a summon which gets buffed by your fire banner. So if I just cast my Drawn Quarter here, you'll see it's charging, and then when I use my banner, you'll see that the feet of the horses, they got flames around them, so that means that they're getting buffed by the fire banner, and it just does insane damage. Like summons plus this fire banner combo just does really, really good damage, which is another reason why I'd really recommend to use Echoing Shade in this setup, but I'll talk about the legendary gems in a bit. So next we have the first main hand, first offhand, sorry, essence, which is the Torrential Refrain. This is one of the most overpowered essence for Crusader, in my opinion, as a whole, and I like to use this offhand essence in almost every single build I'm using for PvE. It's just really, really good. So it reads, Condemn immediately triggers all continual damage on the targets it hits, causing them to take the remaining damage instantly. So if you're applying any kind of continual damage effect, which in this case will be mainly the burning effect from the banner, all of the banner hits, basically all of this burning damage is going to be hitting the target instantly, rather than over time. So this is really, really good. And without this, the build would be doing a lot less damage. So the second offhand essence I'm using is the Gates of Hell. This is not really so important. You can kind of substitute this with something else, and I'll mention some other substitutions, but it reads, Condemn deals 38% increased damage to enemies below 50% life. Condemn isn't really the main damage dealer in this build. It's mainly the Fire Banner and also the Punish primary skill, which will be doing the main damage, as you'll see in the damage breakdown. But this is a decent damage buff to Condemn, so for now I'm using Gates of Hell, but like I said, it doesn't really matter. You can kind of use what you like for the second offhand. You could use Unholy Wall, which kind of gives you a movement speed buff, but I'll talk about that a bit later. As for the last essence I'm using, it's the Observer. This is also another crucial essence to use. So I prefer to use Punish in this build. The downside is that you have to be in range. So Crusader has two primary attacks. One is Punish, one is Sacred Fire. Sacred Fire can be used at range if you have the Horn Splitter and the Bristle Essence. But Punish just does a lot more damage, especially with this main hand, which reads enemies struck by Punish take 19% increased damage from subsequent hits, and this effect stacks up to 57%. So it's extremely good. It's going to buff your Punish, and you'll see that your Punish is doing a lot of damage, and we're stacking attack speed with this build because we have 4-piece Vithu, so I'd really suggest using this main hand essence as the final essence of this build. So I'll also mention the skills I'm using if it wasn't very clear, but I'm using Draw and Quarter, I'm using Holy Banner for the Fire Banner, I'm using Condemn with the chest and the offhand essences, and I'm using Falling Sword, which is going to be the shoulders and the main hand essence. And then for the primary attack, I'm using Punish. For the sets, you have quite a lot of options. This is what worked the best for me with my legendary gems, but I'd suggest that you test for your own setup with the gems that you have, because everybody could be a bit different, and I'll give some options for you guys. But what I like to use is the 2-piece Feasting Barons and 2-piece Banquet set, and then the 4-piece Vithu set. So the reason I'm using this 2-piece Banquet set is that it's extremely good with the offhand, like I mentioned. So this reads that it increases the duration of the harmful effects by 30%, which will increase the duration of your burning effects, but then these burning effects get applied instantly. So the 30% duration's basically being instantly converted into damage, which is extremely good in this build, in my opinion. The Banquet, you'll have pretty much 100% uptime of this because you're always doing a continual damage effect. And then the Vithu is kind of self-explanatory. 2-piece Vithu is extremely good. It's giving you 30% beneficial, which is crucial on almost every Crusader build that you use. And then the 30% attack speed is very good because it allows you to spam Punish, which allows you to spam Condemn a bit more because Condemn is based off the primary attack speed. So like I said, this set bonus gives me the best damage for my setup, but you could also use 4-piece Banquet or 4-piece Angment instead of this setup here. And I would just recommend to try the sets that you have. Cooldown is incredibly important on your set pieces and also beneficial effect. As I play more Crusader, I kind of realize how important these magic affixes are. I mean, I came from the Wizard class where it was also important having them, but I feel like on Crusader, it's even more crucial to have these right magic affix rolls. So I'd suggest having cooldown and beneficial on every piece that you can get. Now let's quickly talk about the legendary gems. So for the legendary gems, I like to use Mother's Lament. I'm using Void Spark here. I'm using Bottled Hope. I'm using Gloom Cask Auxiliary. I'm using Pain Clasp. I'm using Bloodsoaked Jade, Fervent Fang, and Echoing Shade. So Echoing Shade, in my opinion, is one of the most important gems in this setup because it will give you 2 summons depending on the rank. I think it can give you up to 3 summons, which basically are the Shadow Clones. And this gets buffed by your fire banner, and it's extremely good because Crusader, some of the early summons that they have is the Judgment shoulders, or the 2 horses which come from the pants. And this can allow you to get up to 3 extra summons, which just works really, really well with the fire banner. The only downside is that when you're testing on the dummy, there's kind of this unreliability of the summons, because these horses, they kind of like to attack randomly, and sometimes they don't attack at all on the dummy. So I suggest to do a couple of different tests on the dummy just to make sure that they are attacking. And the same thing with the Echoing Shade, you'll find that as it says, your attacks have a 15% chance to summon a Shadow Clone. So for one test, you might not get these Shadow Clones instantly, and then for another test, they might be have 100% uptime. So especially if you're doing a short damage test, let's say 5-10 seconds, you might have very wild variance in the damage numbers that you see. It's because of this summon unreliability. As far as other legendary gems go, the number 1 legendary gem which I'm really missing from my setup and I'd like to have is the Rolling Consequence, the new legendary 5-star gem. Unfortunately, I haven't managed to get one yet, but hopefully I'll get one soon, and I'd probably replace this for either the Fervent Fang, the Bottled Hope, or the Gloom Cusk, which I've got orcsed in this Outlaws Call. Some other legendary gems which you could use, if you're a free-to-play player, I would suggest using Berserker's Eye. It's extremely good. Seller's Weakening would also be decent if you're more of a PvE player. Other ones would be the new 1-star gem, which gives you increased harmful effect duration. This would be acting like another piece of the Baron set, which would also be really good. Some other gems, Viper's Bite, obviously, would be really good because of the continual damage effect. Paragon Command would be really good. There's just a bunch of options. There's no real wrong answers. Just anything which does damage over time, or just outright damage in general, which would be extremely good in this build. For the magic attributes on legendary gear, I'd suggest having crit and then any other offensive stats. So crit chance can roll on main hands, off hands, shoulders, and helmet. And you could try to get as many other offensive stats like crit damage, attack speed, base damage increase is also decent. And on the chest and the pants, you want beneficial effect duration. This really helps a lot, so I've tried to maximize it here, and also for my belt and also my boots. It's very, very useful for any Crusader build that you play. For the Reforges, the best to have, in my opinion, would be 3-piece of the Vengeance set, because this buffs your primary attack damage and gives you chance to deal increased damage. And then I would recommend to have beneficial effect duration on every piece and primary attack damage on every piece. This is probably the best, in my opinion, for most dungeon builds in this game. As for Awakenings, the best pieces to have Awakening on would be the Helmet. This gives you a banner 10% cooldown. The main hand also gives you 10% increased punish damage. This one is really good. And then aside from that, the pants would also be decent because this would give you draw and quarter cooldown. All of the other ones will give you either falling sword damage or condemn damage, which isn't really that good, but you could go for it if you have a lot of rank 10 gems. So now let's quickly do a 10-second damage rotation of this raids build and see how it does. So the playstyle of this build is really simple. Just press all your skills every time when they're off cooldown. And in 10 seconds, I got almost 4.1 million damage per second, a total damage of 40.8 million. And let's take a look at the damage breakdown. I think I peaked at something like 5 million damage, but the damage breakdown, you can see that most of the damage is coming from Punish and Banner. Banner is doing an insane amount of damage, and this is because all of the summons are getting buffed, as well as myself, I'm also getting buffed by the Fire Banner. So that's why it's really, really crazy. You can see also my legendary gems are doing quite a lot of damage. So this shows that I've tried to optimize my gems for this setup as much as possible. So now that we've talked about the raids build and have a good base, I want to talk about how I like to change this build up to run in dungeons. So the main problem with this build, as I'm sure you've already guessed, is that it has very low mobility. So we really need to solve the mobility problem in some way. So there are 2 ways that I like to think about solving the mobility. So the first way I thought about solving the mobility problem would be to change this second offhand, which isn't that useful anyway. And you could change it to Unholy Wall, which says each ally affected by Holy Banner increases the movement speed of you and the allies by 15% up to a maximum of 45%. And it also gives you Holy Banner cooldown, which is really nice. So I'll quickly talk about how Unholy Banner works as a mobility skill. So right now I have 14% movement speed, and if I just press the Holy Banner skill, right now, because it's just me standing in the banner, I'll gain a 15% damage increase, 15%, sorry, movement speed increase, which will put me at 29%. So if I summon my horses while in the banner, I'm actually going to gain the maximum movement speed because there's 3 allies inside, and this will give me the full 45% movement speed, which will take my movement speed up to 59%, which is almost at the 70% cap, which means I'm actually able to move at a really high speed. Let's just try this out here. And also, if you have other allies or other echoing shades, you'll be able to basically get the maximum movement speed without the need to press your horses. So you could play like this. The only downside to this is that you'd have to sometimes use your banner outside of fights just to get a bit of extra movement speed, which isn't really ideal. But this is a very good option. If you can get used to this kind of playstyle of the build, this is an extremely viable option. The other way to solve the mobility issue, which is in my opinion a more elegant option, would be to go for the vanilla horse instead of Light Striders. So we can actually get rid of this Light Strider summon, and we'll still do decent damage. I'll show you guys a damage test, but you can change to these Quiz of Scorn pants, which says condemn deals 90% increased damage for each harmful effect. The enemy suffers from up to a maximum of 76%. So you can switch to these pants, and what this will do is that it will change your horse to a vanilla horse, and this will give you the maximum movement speed, which is 70%, and this also has a pretty decent duration. And I'm going to show the gameplay in dungeons because basically you can use this every time you're not in a fight. The important thing is that when you reach the enemy that you want to fight, that you actually dismount off your horse, and you can do that by either pressing Fallen Sword or you can do that by pressing the banner. And this will allow you to dismount your horse and then fight using your primary attack, which will do a lot more increased damage than fighting on the horse. You don't really want to be fighting on the horse. You can use the horse to chain up enemies, but you want to be fighting off the horse as much as possible when you reach the enemy that you want to kill. So just to review everything I've talked about, because I've talked a lot about changing Essence up, and I don't want this to be confusing, this is the final dungeon build that I like to use. I've kept the sets the same, so it's 2-piece Baron, 2-piece Banquet, and 4-piece Vithu. Everything else is the same as my raids build. The only thing I've changed is I've changed the summon horse into this Quiz of Scorn, which buffs my condemn damage, and I'm using the vanilla horse. So you still keep the Drawn Quarter skill, but you just use the vanilla horse. The only other 2 things which I would be wary about is if you don't like this Falling Sword combo, you could also go for the Judgment combo with the Cradle of Pebble shoulders. So you could switch it up to this essence. And you should switch the Fallen Sword for the Judgment skill, and this will summon another Angel Summon, which also gets buffed by your Fire Banner, which also works very well. This gave me almost as much damage as the other build with Falling Sword, but I just prefer to use Falling Sword because it has a very low cooldown, and I can spam it to keep my 100% Vithu's uptime. So, like I said, just keep the Falling Sword if you have it. So you'd keep the Faith Ascendant shoulders, and you'd switch the Falling Sword skill back instead of the Judgment. The other thing to take notice of is if you have another Crusader in the party, always check their helmet essence, because if they're using Aaron Ignition, there's no point for you to use the same Aaron Ignition Fire Banner. I would probably switch to the Arrow Keeper. So if you've seen my last video where I ran with my friend, we were actually using different banners because the same banner doesn't stack. So you can just stack to, you can just switch to the Arrow Keeper essence here, and then you'll have the 2 different banners. You'll have the 100% crit, and you'll also have the fire damage banner, which does more damage. But if you don't have a Crusader in the group, then I would definitely suggest sticking with the fire banner, which is the Aaron Ignition essence. So to finalize everything, this is what my dungeon build would look like if you want to copy it, and I'll be showing the damage rotation now. So as I said, this build uses the vanilla horse, so I'm not going to be pressing Drawn Quarter at all in this test, and I'm only going to be pressing Banner, Condemn, and Falling Sword. And let's compare it to the raids build and see just how much less damage it is, since the raid build is using the horse summons. Okay, so in 10 seconds, I got almost 3.7 million damage per second. I did a total damage of almost 37 million. And let's have a look at the damage breakdown. So obviously Drawn Quarter is doing no damage because I didn't press it at all. but as you can see, Punish and the Banner are still doing very, very good damage. Condemn is doing decent damage, and the Falling Sword is there because it gives me the 19% buff, which was also very strong. So overall, it's not that much of a damage dip, all things considered. I mean, you lose out on the horse summons, but you gain a huge amount of mobility, and if you don't like that variation, you could always switch out to the Unholy Wall and move around with the Banner. So let's take this dungeon build out for a spin and see how it does. So I'm going to be playing Cavern of Echoes in Inferno 6, and let's just see how quick I can do it. So I like to use Draw on Quarter every time there's no enemies, just to reach the next spot. This is definitely the best mobility skill for Crusader, so that's why I wanted to include it in this build. So here we go, now we've reached the end of the passage, and I'm just going to take down these enemies as fast as possible here, just to get to the first Yeti boss. So they're going down pretty quick, considering that I'm playing solo. And here we go. Now we reach the next boss. Let's see how this does on single target. It should actually perform better on single target. He's going down pretty quick here, I have to say. Yeah, that was pretty quick, so I could finish him off still on the first phase. And now we can use the Horde again, since we need to reach the next spot. I'm actually going to kill off some of these because I'm waiting for my horse skill to come back. Okay, now we have the horse skill back. And we just move to the next spot again. And we have an orange elite here. Just try to kill all of this myself. It is pretty difficult, because this is Inferno 6, but it should be okay. Okay. Oh, you got a legendary. Okay. And now let's make our way to the last boss and see how we do. So the good thing with the horse is that you can also use it to kind of drag mobs before you kind of explode them all. So that's another benefit of having the horse skill over the Banner for mobility. So there we go. And let's see how this does on the boss now. Hopefully I can finish him off in the first phase. So what I also like to do is just to spawn my Echoing Shades. You kind of want to be using your primary attack while there's downtime, just to spawn the Echoing Shades so you do more damage with the Fire Banner, as we saw on the dummy. So there we go. Playing solo, I could still one-shot the boss, and I'm playing with just shy of 3.5k resonance. And it's going very, very smooth. So in a group setting, this will do so much more damage because your Fire Banner is going to be buffing the whole group. So this is an incredibly strong build. So that's about all that I have for this one, guys. If you have any questions or suggestions for builds, then you can post them in the comments below. I urge you guys to try this build or a variation of this build because it has changed my mind about Crusader as a whole. It seems to be that this is a class that's able to dish out quite a lot of damage, even if you're low resonance. It can actually be the main damage dealer in dungeons and in raids if you have the correct build. But with that said, guys, I'll be signing off. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. I'm going to be covering open world build variations in my next video. So see you guys then. Peace.